Israel has been consistent about the fact that they intend to do an offensive action into Rafah. They have said that they have to do this in order to accomplish their goal of completely disarming Hamas and destroying Hamas. As you mentioned, the international community has warned Israel against that because of the fear that it's going to cause even more massive humanitarian issues. And that's because so many people inside Gaza fled the north part of Gaza, where Israel started its offensive actions, into the south and into Rafah. And Rafah has swollen with displaced persons from northern Gaza into southern Gaza. And now they're in a difficult situation. They have to evacuate potentially Rafah. They've been ordered to evacuate Rafah. We saw last week that Israel had been building tent cities north of Rafah. The assumption was that was for displaced persons to move there. Israel has now told its allies that it is about to do this action into Rafah. We don't know when it will do it. Israel doesn't want to take away the element of surprise, and it's always possible that Israel could delay it further, but it seems like all indicators are that it's going to happen very soon.
And as you mentioned, there likely will be that element of surprise, especially given the fact that they want to eliminate Hamas. But when it comes to the timeline of that evacuation, I have to imagine that that is going to be a very long process.
Well, you would think it is going to take a while, especially because it's so crowded in Rafah now. There are, apartments that are filled with families that are hiding out in Rafah, and especially to move small children, it takes longer. And especially when you have a dense population like there is in Rafah right now, it's going to take longer as well. But my expectation is Israel does not want to delay. It's given the order. It said it's going to be a highly violent action against Rafah, and that means it's messaging to the people there, you need to get out.
So what does this mean for a potential ceasefire? I would imagine that the fact that they've now ordered the evacuation of Palestinians, that does not help with encouraging Hamas to take a ceasefire deal.
I think that's right. And there's two ways to look at this. One way is that this probably means there's not going to be a ceasefire before the Rafah action, and they're not going to be able to, they're going to have to probably stall discussions on a ceasefire while the action in Rafah plays out. But once Israel has finished its action in Rafah, you would think there's a better chance of a ceasefire. One would hope there's a better chance for a ceasefire, because that's one of the things Israel said it needed to complete and insisted it had the right to do. So we're going through some difficult times now, but hopefully on the other side of this action in Rafah, which hopefully doesn't cause too much collateral damage, the ceasefire negotiations can restart.
Now, let's talk about the hostages, because, again, that always has been a key component towards any possible ceasefire deal, which is the release, of course, of hostages by Hamas. If this invasion were to occur, what happens there? Because that really is the leverage. We don't know exactly where Hamas is holding these hostages, but what happens then?
Well, some of them may be being held in Rafah, and Israel obviously is doing the best it can to try to track where the hostages might be. And it will, as part of its action in Rafah, it will try to save any hostages if it knows where they are in Rafah. But the hostages, unfortunately, are what Hamas considers its best leverage. So it's going to probably do everything it can to move the hostages into places where Israel is not going or cannot go or does not know about, so it can continue to use that leverage and have that leverage for ceasefire negotiations in the future, and for it to accomplish some of its goals and get some more concessions from Israel.
We've also been hearing from the world. A lot of Israel's allies and a lot of other countries have really called on Israel not to invade Rafah. If it does, how would that impact, if at all, the allyship between Israel and other countries?
It's not clear. And, this is, again, Israel going it alone, ignoring the advice and requests from some of its closest allies, like the United States. It has the right to do that as a sovereign country, but it could harm its relationship with its allies. It could result in allies like the United States being less willing to provide aid in the future, weapons in the future. But so far, the U.S. has not been willing and to put conditions on the weapons and support it provides to Israel. And I think really it depends on how things go in Rafah. If it's a clean action, if Israel is able to accomplish it in a way where it mostly just kills Hamas militants, captures Hamas militants, and there aren't a lot of civilian casualties, then there will be less criticism from Israel's allies. But if what some people fear is going to result in a substantial increase of the humanitarian crisis and more civilian casualties, then there could be a lot of criticism from allies, and there could be repercussions for Israel from its allies.
And let's also talk about Egypt, because Egypt, again, is warning Israel not to invade Rafah. Of course, this is along the border of Egypt. Egypt warning Israel previously that this could potentially derail their decades-long peace treaty. How does Egypt react? I mean, could that also play a role?
I think Egypt will react very badly. Egypt has a couple of things at issue here. First of all, it has been a player in trying to mediate these ceasefire negotiations. It's hoping for success in the ceasefire. It realized an action in Rafah is going to set back the ceasefire negotiations. But it's also worried about people from Gaza and southern Gaza, especially including the Rafah area, having to leave Gaza. And if they have to leave, if they're forced to leave Gaza, they're likely going to go into Egypt, into the Sinai Peninsula. They could be refugees there in the Sinai Peninsula. But Egypt has been very clear about that it doesn't want those refugees. It's not willing to accept refugees from Gaza at this point. So those are some of the things that Egypt is worried about.
Do you think that this is on Israel's radar? Of course, they're aware of this, right? But does that impact how they then proceed? Or is Egypt a non-factor?
I think Egypt is a big factor for Israel. I mean, Egypt wants to continue its détente with Egypt, its alliance with Egypt. They cooperate some on Gaza-related matters. They have constant communication over Gaza-related matters. They even share some intelligence with each other. So Israel doesn't want to lose that relationship or put that relationship in crisis. But I also think from what we hear from Israeli government officials, they believe, top of their priorities is to finish the offensive actions in Gaza, which includes sending in troops into Rafah.
When we're taking a look at a timeline, and again, Israel is not going to publicly announce the exact timeline, but are we, from at least what we know now, are we looking more at a weeks-long process, a months-long process, a days-long process? And again, this is just on the heels of yesterday when Hamas carried out the deadly rocket attack that killed 4 Israeli soldiers.
Right. I think we're talking about several days, perhaps weeks, not months for sure. This is happening imminently. And the rocket attack by Hamas is a big aggravator because, Hamas attacked a place that is a crossing for humanitarian aid. So it targeted Israeli soldiers, but it targeted an area that Israel is allowing humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. So this is an example of Hamas undermining the humanitarian efforts for its own people. And this is one of the things that Hamas constantly does, which it sets back the humanitarian issues for its own people, which is ironic and frustrating. And it should be frustrating for the Palestinian people, and it could make it harder for humanitarian aid to go into Gaza now.
David, before we let you go, any last thoughts that you would want to share with us?
I would just say that we need to watch the situation very closely, and we should look to what the United States says. What does President Biden say about this latest information that Israel is on the verge of going in? And is this going to disrupt the U.S.-Israel relationship? Is this the thing that's going to cause Biden to put conditionality on further aid and assistance to the Israeli Defense Forces?
It's going to be very interesting to watch. David Tafuri, foreign policy analyst, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.